I'm Craig Timm, and this is ACAMS Live. Thank you to everyone joining us today. Feel free to say hello in the comments. Let us know where you are tuning in from. Our topic today is information sharing. In my view, one of the US AML regime's superpowers are the information sharing provisions authorized under Section 314B of the USA PATRIOT Act. These allow financial institutions to share information amongst each other to identify potential money laundering or terrorist financing. And when I think back to my time working at a financial institution, many, if not most, of the most effective things I think we did while I was there was done leveraging 314B. Now, despite this, and despite a lot of work by FinCEN and others in the US government to promote its use, 314B continues to be underutilized. And I think there's probably a couple of reasons for this. I think some may just not have seen the benefits yet. And then for others, I think I hear these criticisms or misconceptions out there that seem to persist. Well, there's no better person out there to explain the benefits of 314B and to address these criticisms and misconceptions than FinCEN's Associate Director for Strategic Operations, Katherine Ford. In that role, Katie oversees FinCEN's stakeholder integration with law enforcement, financial institutions, and regulators, implements FinCEN's public-private partnerships, which include FinCEN Exchange and the Bank Secrecy Act Advisory Group, another one of the US AML regime superpowers in my view. And importantly for our discussion today is she's responsible for the implementation of 314B. So Katie, thank you so much for being here today.
Craig, thanks so much for having me. I am so excited to do this session because I couldn't agree with you more. I think we need to promote the use of 314B. It is just such an incredible tool.
Well, let's jump right in. I talked about in my introduction the benefits that I've seen from the private sector, and we'll get into that a little bit. But FinCEN is often out encouraging the use of 314B, as you're doing here today, whether it's in alerts or advisories or speeches or other forums like this. What is it from your perspective about 314B information sharing that makes it so effective and so useful in your work and then the broader US government?
Yeah, 314B is just an incredibly powerful tool, which is why you see us mention 314B in so many of our public-facing products and why you hear us talking about it so much. When we see reporting that is a product of 314B cooperation, generally speaking, it provides more comprehensive and actionable information for us to use. We all know that multi-layered financial schemes are becoming more common as illicit actors become more sophisticated. And often individual financial institutions each only have a piece of that puzzle. And they need to be able to share information to put together those pieces to better identify suspicious activity that crosses national borders. This is especially the case for financial activity that involves multiple financial institutions, accounts, and financial products and services. And financial institutions that engage in 314B information sharing can put together these pieces to see a more complete picture of these sophisticated actors and their networks. And as we note in our December 2020 314B fact sheet, which I will refer everyone to multiple times today, FinCEN SAR regulations allow these financial institutions to file joint SARs. And joint SARs, we call them super SARs because of the amazing insights they provide to us and to law enforcement and to national security organizations. And having the type of high quality information that we often see in super SARs means we get a better picture of all of the illicit actors involved in the network and their underlying accounts, which is a huge benefit to law enforcement. It also helps with our feedback loops because if we receive super SARs with very helpful information, we're able to better identify potential red flags. Identifying red flags means that in turn, we can produce better and more actionable information that we can give back to the public sector in our alerts and advisories. Then financial institutions, even those that weren't involved in the 314B sharing, can then better tune their transaction monitoring to detect complex illicit financial activity schemes that we are seeing through 314B information. And 314B information sharing sort of creates this virtuous cycle where we can all benefit. And if helpful, I can give a concrete example to kind of illustrate this virtuous cycle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that this one is one of the great ones from the Russia case. FinCEN's Research and Analysis Division analyzed information from one of the super SARs to map suspected Russian criminal networks using international financial system to launder funds and conceal assets. These super SARs were informative for developing analysis that was shared with US law enforcement, Treasury counterparts, and the US Department of Justice, as well as presentations delivered to foreign financial intelligence units collaborating with FinCEN on this threat. So in government, we just see this tremendous benefit in the form of more robust reporting that leverages 314B to deepen the understanding of potential suspicious activity. And it provides us a more complete, useful, actionable SARs as a result.
So obviously huge benefits that you just laid out for the US government. But I think one of the underrated parts is that there are actually benefits for the financial institutions themselves by using 314B that I don't think people appreciate. They think, oh, it's a voluntary program, it's something else I have to do. But there are actually a lot of benefits that an institution gets by participating. I'm wondering, you're engaging with people out there a lot. What do you hear from institutions about what they like about 314B in terms of the benefits they see for themselves?
So Craig, that is a really great point, because we in government aren't the only ones who benefit from 314B. The participants also derive a lot of value from information sharing. And while ultimately I like to think we're all on the same side and we all want to combat illicit finance, which is the bottom line, and we all benefit when we protect the integrity of the US financial system, I think there are three other co-commitment benefits that I can highlight today. One is that financial institutions can build a deeper understanding of customer activity and risk. And what I mean by this is essentially what I talked about when responding to your last question. 314B information sharing allows financial institutions to have a deeper understanding of a customer and their activity, which makes it easier for the institution to make the call on whether what they're seeing is suspicious or innocuous. And this, in turn, influence customer risk ratings and streamlines decision makings on SAR filings. This enhanced understanding of a customer impacts how banks may view customers across the board. So on the one hand, having a more complete picture of a customer activity can help financial institutions identify nefarious activity. And on the other hand, this information also allows institutions to continue to confidently serve customers that, absent the context that's provided by 314B information sharing, may inaccurately appear to be higher risk. i.e., this can potentially mean that if there's 314B information sharing that provides information about a customer that provides a clearer picture, then that customer could potentially be retained, whereas otherwise it might be unclear what the customer is doing. A second piece of this is fostering effectiveness in AML CFT programs. And effectiveness is, of course, the buzzword that everyone talks about, but having that deeper understanding of a customer's activity also means that financial institutions can better focus their efforts on where they are most needed. So when a participating financial institution starts to recognize patterns emerging from the bigger picture, this also enables FinCEN to use these patterns in our alerts and advisories. And financial institutions can use those patterns to prove the effectiveness of internal processes like risk ratings and transaction monitoring, which of course is hugely beneficial. The third area I'll highlight is just developing deeper relationships across the industry. We often hear that 314B participants appreciate the opportunity the program provides for developing deeper relationships with trusted partners and to find and nurture new partnerships. They want to protect themselves from abuse and do their part to combat financial crime. And 314B allows them to really circle the wagons and to provide high quality insights like those we see in super SARs. One thing in particular that participating financial institutions have told us is how powerful it is to alert partner financial institutions to customers whose suspicious activities they might not have been previously aware. So that's just a few of the benefits, though certainly during the course of this discussion, I would love to hear from financial institutions about other benefits that they see.
Yeah, so definitely leave a comment in the chat. Let us know your experience with 314B. We'd love to hear from you as part of this discussion. Let me just echo what you said, particularly in terms of the more complex picture. I've seen it go every conceivable way after sending a 314B request, where you send a request, what you get back, and all of a sudden we're not concerned anymore about the activity. I've seen it, you're a little bit more concerned or a lot more concerned. And so it is that more complete picture. And as we move forward with the AML Act implementation and all of that, I think, while we don't really know how that's going to be yet, the value of a network analysis SAR, the value of building out a network like this, it's almost certainly more valuable both to the institution and the government than a run-of-the-mill SAR. So I think I couldn't echo the benefits to financial institutions themselves more. But there are some criticisms out there. You mentioned you talk to people a lot. I'm sure you hear them. There are some misconceptions. And so I thought we could just hit those head on today. And one of the things I hear about 314B is confusion about the scope, and specifically when it comes to fraud. I've heard institutions say that they just aren't sure whether 314B can be used when they're investigating potential fraud. I was wondering, what do you say to that?
Yeah, I am both apprehensive and excited to address the criticisms of 314B. We used to hear the question about fraud quite a bit, and I really hoped that our latest fact sheet on 314B, which is on our website, and we issued it in December 2020, had cleared this up. But if there's still confusion, I am more than happy to address this now. Financial institutions can use 314B when investigating potential fraud anytime there's an indication of potential money laundering. And I can unpack that quite a bit. So to use 314B and benefit from the information sharing safe harbor it affords, a financial institution only needs to have a reasonable basis to believe the information being shared may be related to money laundering or terrorist activity. Money laundering is big, and money laundering is quite simple. It involves transactions that involve the proceeds of criminal activity. This covers a lot of activity. Anytime someone is withdrawing, moving, transferring, or using money that involves proceeds of criminal activity, that can be money laundering. And as our fact sheet notes, there are specified unlawful activities that underpin the money laundering statutes. And when I say criminal activity, this is what I'm talking about. These include a wide array of statutes criminalizing fraud, which would encompass schemes victimizing individuals, organizations, and the government, as well as computer fraud and abuse. So generally speaking, where there is fraud, there will very often be potential money laundering. I also want to reiterate what the thresholds are here. The financial institution does not have to have even reached the conclusion that the activity about which it wants to share constitutes reportable suspicious activity, let alone identified what predicate offense or legislatively specified unlawful activity may be implicated in the activity of interest. So put simply, if a financial institution has enough information to believe that they're looking at something possibly involving the proceeds of a potential fraud, they are ahead of the game and should feel confident that the information sharing would be covered by the 314B safe harbor.
That is really helpful. I think if you're one of those institutions out there that's, where this confusion still exists, ultimately you're gonna follow the legal advice of your internal counsel, external counsel, whatever your institution says. But one of the things you can do is take the fact sheet that Katie mentioned, and we'll put a link right here so you've got it in front of you. Raise it to them. Make sure they're aware of this, because they may be operating off of old information. So I think getting this in front of them, having that from FinCEN in front of them, it'll at least give you an opportunity to re-raise the discussion if you're at a place where that confusion still exists. So let's turn now to another one. I see a question in the chat here about why isn't there a standardized form or method for information sharing under 314B? It's kind of, I don't want to say it's a free-for-all, but it's a bit of a free-for-all, but I think that's intentional. So Katie, what do you say? How do you answer that?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And, I've definitely heard this feedback before. Some financial institutions do think that they would get better or faster responses if there were an agreed upon format. But in our view, one of the great things about 314B is its flexibility. It would be really difficult for a form to capture all of the permutations of information sharing that could be undertaken as a part of 314B. And there's a real risk that creating a standardized format could end up artificially restricting the type and nature of information sharing that can be accomplished under 314B. And accordingly, the value of the information sharing program itself. We want financial institutions that participate in 314B to be creative in their requests and in their responses, and we want them to have all the space they need to innovate and to provide context around their requests and responses. And we don't want them to feel as if they are restricted or locked into specific questions or formats. And moreover, a frequent complaint of financial institutions is we don't want them to be constricted to a check the box or fill in the blank type exercise. So for example, in our 314B fact sheet, which you are so kindly posting, we note that section 314B information and its implementing regulations impose no limitations on the sharing of PII under the safe harbor, as long as that information sharing is otherwise consistent with the purposes of 314B. And similarly, another benefit of the flexibility is that 314B and its implementing regulations impose no restrictions about the type or medium of information that can be shared. So conceivably, things like camera footage from an ATM transaction or cyber-related data, such as an IP address, can be shared. And the bottom line is we really want participants to be creative, and we feel that dictating a specific fixed format for information sharing wouldn't serve that goal. But again, with all things, we're happy to continue to receive feedback on how financial institutions are using this. And as more institutions engage in 314B, maybe there's even more we can do.
Yeah, the way I think about it is, you're sending a request because there's a gap in your knowledge, right? And you can't know what you don't know. And so there's no way as the sending, at least in my view, there's no way the sending institution could think of all the questions to ask or that's part of the beauty of it, that, they send it out and then the receiving institution and the responding institution has the ability to sort of figure out what's out there and share that back. I think the flexibility is really an asset. So you can count me amongst the people who would say, I wouldn't want to be hemmed in. I think the beauty of it is its flexibility. Another frustration, and then I promise we'll get back to the good stuff here too. But another thing I hear is there's often slow responses. Sometimes there's a lack of response at all. This leads some institutions to just give up. I guess, it's a voluntary program, so I'm not sure there's much you can do about that. But what do you say to the institutions who have experienced, this frustration with the process?
Yeah. I've heard this one too. Thanks for raising it, Craig. I would say, let's increase the use, right? But I hear you. It's a tricky one because, of course, 314B is a voluntary program and financial institutions cannot be compelled to respond. So it is just an unfortunate reality that financial institutions are likely not to get 100% response rate. Like, that's just realistic. That said, hopefully everything we've talked about so far is making the compelling case for the value of 314B. And I hope that everyone listening walks away from this session with a clear understanding that not registering to participate in 314B or not responding to 314B requests is really a missed opportunity. And there are a few things I'd recommend to anyone who is frustrated by a lack of responses to their 314B requests. First, I'd recommend that the financial institution take a look at its own requests and make sure that it is providing enough context so that the partner financial institution can really understand what it is looking at and what it needs in response. We repeatedly hear from financial institutions how frustrating it is to receive a 314B request that reads more like a KYC request. So please just make an effort, to be intentional with your requests, and it may help your relationships in that way. Second, I'd encourage financial institutions to periodically take a look at your own track records of 314B responses. The financial institution should feel confident that it's engaged in the kind of outbound sharing that would encourage reciprocal sharing. We hear from a lot of 314B participants that, like so many other programs, building a reputation as a credible interlocutor is so important. So even within a program structure like 314B, trust is key. Trust is important. And third, and relatedly, I'd encourage that financial institutions look at overall responses received with a goal of identifying any patterns in how responsive different financial institutions and counterparts are and in what circumstances. And this would allow financial institutions to focus its efforts or course correct on their approach based on what they find of patterns in responses. And finally, I would just encourage financial institutions to more generally deepen their relationships with key partner institutions that are registered with 314B. As I said, trust is still key in information sharing, even within the 314B program. So knowing who to call and picking up the phone, the old-fashioned way of communicating and just saying, we just sent you a really important 314B request, can make the difference between a response and a non-response. And I'll note that if financial institutions identify particular partners that are consistently non-responsive, consider escalating that within your own organization so that it can inform broader conversations about your financial institution to financial institution relationships, especially if the relationship may be a correspondent banking type of relationship. You may have an opportunity there in terms of setting some terms of responsiveness. And if a financial institution wants to actively participate in 314B sharing to protect itself from abuse by illicit actors, I would imagine that the institution would want to ensure it is partnering with institutions that also share that ethos.
Yeah, it's great. It's great advice. And in my experience, look, there are institutions out there that do respond to 100% of requests they get. So, that's one misconception, that, especially some of the big banks don't respond to everything. There are some that do. But the ones that don't still discern based on quality. And if you establish yourself as an institution that sends requests with context that are valuable, you'll make the cut, so to speak, in terms of where they want to respond. So I think your advice around, sort of looking in the mirror, so to speak, and it's really the only thing you can do, but it actually can make a difference. So let's turn now, as we start to wrap up, in practice today, 314B, most of it's done bilaterally, right? And we that's been the context of our discussion. You send one request to another institution, they respond, they don't. And that's certainly, a very effective way to use 314B, but it's not the only one. The law is actually much broader than that. And so, for example, there's a provision around sharing information amongst associations of financial institutions. And that's sort of a term of art, associations of financial institutions. And this, I think, is really underutilized today and potentially really powerful because it allows multiple institutions to share at the same time amongst each other. So simultaneous information sharing amongst many institutions. And when you talk about network analysis and all of that, this is it. So I wanted to get your thoughts. I'm just curious about your thoughts on associations for financial institutions and what you've seen when they're used.
Yeah, Craig, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, this aspect of the authority is both hugely powerful and hugely underutilized. The association model essentially supercharges all of the benefits of 314B information sharing that we've been talking about, both in terms of the benefits for the US government and law enforcement and the benefits for participating financial institutions. To go back to the analogy of the puzzle, it's the associations of financial institutions can create the difference between a few pieces of the puzzle and potentially putting together the full picture. And it can also be an effective model in terms of both resource and risk mitigation frameworks, because association participants can pool their resources to identify and mitigate common illicit finance risks. For example, similar relationships with the same suspicious customers or having similar suspicious activity occur at similarly situated financial institutions. An association of financial institutions availing itself of 314B authorities and safe harbors would enable them to tackle some of their most complicated problems. So to give you an example, because I think examples are always helpful, I want to highlight a case from 2020 that won a FinCEN Director's Law Enforcement Award in the Transnational Security Threat category. We use these awards, the FinCEN Director Law Enforcement Awards, we call them LEAP Awards, to recognize agencies that use BSA data to successfully pursue and prosecute criminal investigations. And a quick aside here, I will also separately promote those. So please do see that part of our website so you can see the value of BSA data being used. But in this specific case, the case from 2020, the FBI benefited from superstars and a collaboration with a 314B association to map a complex international network of companies affiliated with North Korea's WMD procurement and proliferation programs. And this allowed the FBI to financially disrupt the network and for the Department of Justice to execute one of the largest seizures of North Korean funds in history. That's an incredibly impactful example and one that's public, but rest assured that the associations of financial institutions can play a hugely valuable role in these investigations with law enforcement. To your point, Craig, on being underutilized, there are currently 13 associations registered under 314B, and I would love to see that number increase. These organizations are generally either a group of financial institutions that have formed an association, or they are a group of financial institutions led by a compliance service provider that has created an association to allow its FI customers to share on its platform. And so I'll draw this point out a little bit more because it's in our fact sheet and it's worth referring to. FinCEN does not require the organization that forms and operates an association of financial institutions whose members engage in 314B information sharing to itself be a regulated financial institution. As long as all members are financial institutions and the unincorporated association operates in compliance with the other 314B requirements and use security and in compliance with the security and use requirements, the unincorporated association can participate just like an incorporated one. I'll also say, just in terms of composition, most of our currently registered associations involve primarily banks. There is at least one that's made up of MSBs, but there are very few that involve other types of financial institutions. And in my view, that is really a missed opportunity. I would love to see more associations of financial institutions, specifically ones that are focused on potentially specific regions or high priority threats. And we also want to hear from existing associations about their successes and their challenges. You know, in thinking this through, I'll just throw out a few types of associations and areas that I think could be valuable, just to give some specific ideas and examples. One is associations of small and medium-sized banks. If you look back through FinCEN's press releases recently, you'll see that FinCEN and Treasury have been engaging with small and medium-sized financial institutions that may be seeing more Russia-related illicit financial activity as the larger banks are getting better at rooting out that activity. An association model for small and medium-sized banks could help these institutions better understand the evolving threat landscape and then map the networks of concern. Another idea, just given how important this is to Americans right now, associations focused on fentanyl. Treasury recently announced the Counter Fentanyl Strike Force, and you may be aware that FinCEN has been hosting a series of regional FinCEN exchanges that are focused on fentanyl. And there's this huge whole of government focus on combating fentanyl and clear engaged law enforcement audience. And I think superstars on fentanyl in particular would be very welcome. And FinCEN's certainly happy to help with that collaboration. Finally, I'll kind of throw out a wildcard idea, but what about associations focused on the casino industry, right? I see a huge value in a 314B association among casinos, given that illicit actors looking to exploit that sector often hop physically from one venue to another. I'm sure there's many other ideas of how associations could be used in this space, and I would encourage you to speak with similarly situated financial institutions to see if you can form an association or if there might be harmonizations that could happen here. I think that associations just hold huge potential, and we've already seen this borne out of a few high-profile cases, and we want to hear more about them. We want to hear the successes, we want to collaborate on what makes sense, and we just want to see more of them.
I love the creativity because they are so I can't believe it's only 13. And I think as we, as a regime, start to become more focused on effective outcomes, these associations are the future, right? Any organization of any size or sophistication at all is using multiple banks, multiple financial institutions, multiple types, whether it's just in a local community or across a country. And so I love some of the ideas that you could just be in your town, could just establish an association amongst your banks, which allows you to get together. And remember, you can talk about these things and do so much. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And I just say, the ones that I've seen work they all start small. So it doesn't have to be this grand thing, right? It can start small and build from there as you build trust and all the other things. So I love those ideas. And I think that to me, that might be one of my biggest takeaways from our discussion today. But Katie, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the hard questions head on. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's joined us live or who's watching the recording of this. Now, Katie's mentioned it a couple of times, but we'd love to continue to hear from you. So let us know in the comments if you've got, good experiences with 314B, good, bad, or otherwise. Let us know, benefits, challenges, all of that stuff, associations of financial institutions. If you're interested in learning more, let us know there too. We'll make sure that all the comments get packaged up and get to Katie and her team, and so they can consider those as they move forward, because this will obviously continue to be a big area of focus for FinCEN. So thank you again, Katie, for being here today. Thank you to all of you out there, and we look forward to seeing you again on the next ACAMS Live.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. This was great.